welcome to another episode of the Snowy's Camping Show. You are here with Ben and Lauren as usual, and today is a special day because not only do we have a guest with us, but it's also my birthday at the time of recording anyway. It's not the day that you guys will be listening to this, but I'm very happy I got flowers today and lots of love from everybody in the office. So
Extra
I'm stoked.
Sparkle as you walked into the office today.
Extra sparkle. Yeah. So you guys have asked lots and lots for more information and chat around air tents, and today we've got Ryan back on the show all the way from New Zealand. So if you haven't tuned in before, episode 16, I think we're chatting about waterhead ratings with Ryan, and 21 talking about camp furniture and things like that as well. So have a listen to those if you haven't. Also, before we get into the chat, I haven't mentioned it yet, subscribe wherever you're listening to your podcast, jump onto Facebook, The Snowy's Camping Show, and join in on the chat. So Ryan, how are you?
Great. Yeah, it's great to be back chatting with you guys.
Yeah, we're stoked to have you back. Everybody loves you, I think.
Heaps of good information on the last episode. So you're from Zempire, and I think you guys are probably, I don't know how confident I'm in saying, I think you're the leader in air tents in the industry. You've got some pretty space age looking designs out there that are probably leading the way. But Zempire, though, you're a New Zealand based brand and you make a whole range. Just give us I think everyone who's seen your episodes before know who Zempire is and who you are. But for those who don't, just a brief outline quickly on yourself and Zempire.
Yeah, so Zempire, we've been around just over 15 years, and we're best known, especially lately, for our air tents. We were the first to introduce that into the Australasian market, so in New Zealand, and since we've gone into Australia as well. And yeah, so we're kind of a leader, especially in this part of the world, for that air tent technology, and it's catching on. It's becoming very popular, and some other brands are kind of following the trend. But yeah, we like to think of ourselves as a market leader and offering the premium end of air tents.
Cool. As Lauren said, we've had heaps of questions, heaps of requests after this about more information on air tents. So yeah, I think we're going to get a lot of info, a lot of interest in this episode. But
I mean, you mentioned how you've only you were the first to bring them into the Australasian region.
Fumbling this morning.
Coffee. But obviously they've sort of been around in Europe and the UK for a bit longer. Why do you think it took a longer time for them to sort of prop their head up here?
That's a good question. I think one thing a lot of people know is that air tents have actually been around for a long time. They were first introduced in the 1940s. I think in Holland is where they started out. So they started out in Europe, which is probably one reason. In terms of like being used in commercial, like recreational camping tents, it's really just been in the last couple of decades, really, but they've caught on. And why they've cropped up in Europe, especially, there's a few reasons. It's a bigger market, so there's greater demand and competition driving that technology and innovation. But I think another part of it is, Europeans, especially in the UK, they camp quite differently to how we camp in Australia, for example. There's a lot less of the kind of touring style of camping, and it's more where you go and you set up your campsite and you stay there for a couple of weeks and have more of a staycation. So you see a lot more of the very large size camping tents, and there's just a huge advantage, especially in that drove the development of air tents, because if you think of a really large tent, they're quite difficult to set up, but the air tents really simplify that process. And so that kind of, I think, drove a lot of that development over in the UK. And since then it's just become the gold standard over there. And that's trickled down to all styles of tents. So you find it in very small dome tents all the way up to the very large family camping tents. So that's kind of our take on that. And we've been happy to introduce that here in New Zealand and Australia. And I think people are catching on and seeing the benefits of those.
We got some pretty cool accessories too, and you guys seem to be the only ones that I've seen offer it, but like carpets for tents and roof covers and all those sort of things. When you talk about that style of camping they do in the UK, that makes sense. That's pretty much setting up a home in a tent for a while. But most of us Aussies go, well, I don't want carpet in my tent. But Maybe it'll catch on here one day. I don't know.
It seems to be they've had quite a few requests for it over the years. And I remember the first one when someone put on and I was like, oh, do you sell tent carpets? And I'm like, mate, what the hell?
Yeah,
10 carpets?
Yeah.
Who needs a carpet for their bloody tent?
And then Zempire sells it. Oh, it's a real thing. Oh.
Yeah, totally.
We probably should outline this. Most people who are tuning in now will know what an air tent is. But for those who don't, an air tent is basically, it's a tent, but all the metal poles or fiberglass poles or alloy poles or whatever it is that are in a normal tent that we've become accustomed to are replaced by big tubes of air basically that's inflated. So you peg the tents out, use a pump like this and you put it up. So that's an air tent in a nutshell, and that's what we're digging into today.
They fall into the instant up tent category really, don't they?
Pretty easy to set up, yeah.
What do you think is one of the biggest misconceptions around air tents?
Yeah, those who, because it is a relatively new technology, especially to us here in New Zealand and Australia. So there are some misconceptions that we've found with those who didn't grow up camping with air tents around and whatnot. And it makes sense if people are comparing them to something like, like an inflatable beach toy or an airbed, which are notoriously flimsy and unreliable. They pop. You can understand the reservations of replacing your tent frame with it, but in reality, the tubes that we use in the airframes are really durable and strong, and there's it's a multi-layer construction, so that inner tube is protected and encased in a very durable outer casing as well. So it makes for a really reliable and rugged structure. So it's probably better to compare to other pneumatic technologies. If you think of things like inflatable boats or even tires in your car, we rely and we trust inflatable technology in some areas. So when you compare it to those, it makes a lot more sense that, hey, this could be a really great solution. So yeah, it's just probably the most important thing is to get it out of your mind that it's not an inflatable beach toy that's holding up your tent.
That's a good way to look at it when you talk about, we rely on tyres every day, don't we, driving around, but we don't think twice about that or compare that to a, inflatable rainbow unicorn floaty thing.
Well, I actually have an inflatable stand-up paddleboard, which I had heard about, and I was like, denied about it for ages. And then a friend had one and it was amazing. Like I was actually shocked at how awesome it was, literally just being inflatable, and obviously way more convenient because it can pack down and all that sort of stuff.
And they blow up quite rigid, don't they? When you blow it up as tight as they can take.
Rigid.
And that's a similar concept with the air poles that you're putting a certain amount of pressure in it and they become quite a rigid structure when they're blown up.
With obviously sort of breaking, they've been around in Europe and things like that for a long time, but with sort of breaking in with this technology to the Australasian market, how much was consumer confidence a factor and trying to sort of get people over to air tents and maybe even still now? How did that, how have you guys sort of worked on building that? Yeah, I mean, introducing this kind of technology, whenever you're the first to do that, or one of the first anyway, it can be a real hurdle. And one of the major benefits we have is just having our retailers having these displays up and the likes of you guys doing videos and explaining it a bit more. But I think once you see an air tent and you can actually go and put your hands on one and see how rigid it is and how durable it is, a lot of those kind of preconceived notions go out the window and the light bulb turns on, so to speak. So that's kind of been our strategy in a way, is just let the product speak for itself. And for the most part, it does that. So the more, we see those tents in campgrounds or in stores set up and people can actually see what it's all about, it's pretty apparent to see what the benefits are and that they're going to be an awesome option. Yeah.
What's the Bladder? I know, excuse me, when they first came out, other brands had it, and there was different materials used for the Bladder, like the actual inflatable bit of the pole, and there was issues with them splitting and stuff. And I'm sure there are probably cheap. I don't know. I couldn't pull up any in my mind, but I'm sure there's probably cheap versions of air tents out there. But what is the actual Bladder material, and how strong is it? Like, can you give? I think of like a reservoir, like Camelback brand reservoirs, right? They test those by blowing them up to some stupid sort of size, right? Like it's just this massive thing for a 2-litre bladder, and people kind of go, oh, okay, it is tough. Is there some sort of reference that you can give how you test the air poles to let people know that they are strong? They don't split unless there's something quite obviously wrong with a manufacturing fault or something like that.
Yeah, that's a good point. And that, again, has been one of our obstacles, is that there have been inferior products out there on the market using inferior materials or inferior design and construction and that kind of thing. But if it's well constructed and using the right materials, they're really strong and reliable. And most of our inner tubes are made out of TPU rather than PVC, which is similar to, like you said, the Camelback reservoirs, that kind of thing. And I wish I had one here, but if you can put it in your hands, they're actually really hard to even stretch and almost impossible to tear by hand, and there again, it just lends it to your confidence in the material. And there again, that inner TPO bladder, which is quite strong and durable on its own, is encased in an outer polyester and polyethylene laminated wrap, which gives it structure and additional protection as well. I'm not sure if we'll talk about testing a little bit more later, but we do test those to a really high burst strength. So our recommended pressure, like working pressure for the tents, is about 7 to 9 PSI, whereas we've burst tested all of our air tubes to over 30 PSI. So kind of that range between where you're going to be using the airframe to where it will fail, there's a huge separation there. So
okay.
Yeah. And I
did that answer your question? Sorry.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
I think well, we can sort of go more into testing now. Like, how do you do the testing yourself, or is that done by a third party?
Both. So we there's a whole lot of different tests that we do. So on one side, there's the product development side, and then there's also additional tests we do in the QC process just to kind of validate that production is living up to the original design. But we've tested these poles in so many different ways, even down to just leaving tents inflated for months on end in elements to see what will happen. And we've been able to test using these custom 3D printed pressure gauges to see how the pressures in the tubes change with changes in temperature and whatnot. But I think what most people would be interested in is the burst testing. So we do test, our designs in the development process, and kind of our minimum is 30 PSI. We expect that, the construction of a particular tube design should be able to withstand 30 pounds of pressure without issue. A lot of the tubes, depending on the size or the shape, will go well beyond that. So we've tested that here at the office, and we've tested it in the factories in China and whatnot.
Is you smiling and your laughs because there's been some fun around that?
Yeah, admittedly, it is pretty fun. It can when you get it up to pressure and trying to do it by hand is almost impossible, especially with a standard pump. But I've definitely taken it to that burst plenty of times, and it can be a bit exciting.
Yeah, I really struggle to even blow up a balloon because of the anticipation of what if it pops? Like, that would just be next level.
I know you guys brought out a tent. It was a few years ago now. I think it was one of the first ones where all the poles kind of came to one central point. I think there was maybe 6 poles in one central point. And I do recall there was a couple of there's still some reviews around where when they first came out, there was issues around some bursting there, and I think it was around the joins and stuff. But I was really impressed that you guys jumped on and just addressed it really quickly, and there doesn't seem to have been any issues since. But is usually the weakest point the joins? Because obviously the tube's pretty good, right? But then you've got to join that tube sort of in a central spot where sort of 4 tubes come together. So is that kind of where the weakest point is in your testing?
Yeah. So, and that's a good point to address, actually. When it's constructed correctly, there's almost never failures with that small run of the jet set tents initially. it was actually because of a manufacturing fault. And that's usually where we do see failures, not because someone has accidentally pumped it up too high or you accidentally got, an accidental puncture in the tube. But if there is a failure, it'll be because, the outer casing wasn't sewn correctly. And in that particular instance, it was because there's supposed to be a double stitch line with reinforcing, and some of the tubes actually only got a single stitch line, so it became a weak point. So that's where, kind of the choice of materials along with the overall design and construction are both really important. And we learned a lot from that instance, and we were able to improve our QC process to make sure in future production runs that it was actually being constructed to the original design specifications. Yeah, to answer your question, when we do see failures, it's usually because of a weak stitching point or something that wasn't stitched together correctly.
So just to clarify, that's not to do with the bladders itself, it's to do with the casing. And I'm assuming, because I personally have dealt with 2 customers over my time that have had a ruptured bladder, but because they admitted that they unzipped the zipper when it was pumped up because they wanted to see what was inside. And so in my mind, I'm thinking of how you get a basketball and then sometimes you get that little egg in the roundness of the basketball and then that's where it bursts. So I'm assuming that that's sort of essentially what the casing does. The casing's withholding the pressure, and if there is a weak spot in that, then that obviously becomes the point of
rupture. That's exactly right. Basketball is a great example. Another one is like a bike tire. If you get a cut in the sidewall of the bike tire, the inner tube will kind of balloon out and pop in that way. And it's a very similar thing. That casing is basically holding the structure. And if you have a very small opening, that extra pressure will put a lot of stress on that single point on the inner tube, causing a failure. So you don't want to open them up while they're inflated. So we'll tie those together and have a warning label saying "Do not open."
Yes, admittedly, the customer did say, "We're zip tied together. I just couldn't help myself. I didn't realise."
Anyway. I got to admit, when those jet sensors first came out, so I think it was even a pre-production sample that you guys sent us for a video. When I was setting it up.
That was a long time ago, wasn't it?
It was a long time ago. And like I said, I'm impressed that you guys, this is not a negative thing because you guys jumped on and addressed it really quickly, and obviously it was a manufacturing fault. But the one I was setting up exploded. And my photographer and I are shooting the video and I'm pumping away and then it just went boom. And it was in a caravan park. This massive noise right across the suburb and the tent just went shoo. And I must admit at the time we're thinking, oh no, this isn't a good thing. But your rep at the time came out and looked at it and you guys addressed it. And I think that the amount of issues have obviously gone since then. So but it was quite a moment to hear that happen. But
I've been here for 3 and a bit years, and as I said, the only 2 that I've ever personally heard of were people who did not heed the warning labels. So they're definitely awesome, and they're growing in popularity as well. Like I reckon when I first started, hardly any inquiries, and now it's like, every couple of days it's like, when are you getting more tents in? And I want an air tent and whatever. So it's really good. Yeah,
I think confidence is definitely building. And
I think one thing a lot of people will be interested in is, our return rates or failure rates or warranty process for our air tents has actually been less than on our fiberglass pole tents. We're basically kind of doing away with our fiberglass pole tents because there's so many advantages to the air tent technology. But like any technology and any product, there will be the occasional problem and the occasional failure, especially if you're not heeding the instructions or if there's a manufacturing fault kind of thing. But overall, if you step back and look at it, we found that the air frames specifically have been really reliable and a great success story compared to other pole structures like steel pole frames and fiberglass pole frames. So as a whole, that return rate in our warranty analytics has been really favorable for the airframes overall.
I think
that's awesome.
Sorry, I was going to say the airframes too. With a steel frame, like a cheaper steel frame, if the pole goes, quite often there's a sharp element that's then created with the pole, and that then rips a fly as well. So with an airframe, if the pole goes, you can replace that, but it's not also damaging all the fabric around it too. So, yeah, there's failures with everything. I mean, there's a lot of cheap metal frames out there that bend. Once they're bent, it's really hard to fix it or use it. But we probably should move on to
I just whilst, because we've talked about testing and things like that, but I just want to raise another question that's often brought up with our customers as well, is being a New Zealand-based brand and obviously European stuff, the Australian climate and sort of camping seasons and things are quite different. So is that a factor in testing to, see how it would stand up to, UV ratings and temperatures and all that sort of stuff that we'd find here?
Like a 40-degree day in the outback?
Yeah, or more.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's actually one of the common questions we get is, if it starts out in a very cold morning and it gets really hot during the day, is that going to expand the pressures in the airframe and lead to a failure? And I mean, that will differ depending on the tube, how big the tube is, how the thing is. But as a general rule of thumb, what we found is, and generally speaking, about 10 degrees of temperature increase will be less than 1 PSI of pressure difference in the frame.
Yeah, right.
So even in like a worst case scenario of a very cold morning up to a very hot afternoon, it's only a matter of 2 or 3, sometimes maybe 4 PSI of pressure difference that will be experienced. And that's, we've never experienced a failure that we could identify as that being the issue. So, I mean, that's a good point to bring up, just to kind of allay some fears, especially in Australia, that those hot conditions are going to cause problems for the airframe. We just haven't found any evidence of that in our testing, which is great.
Yeah.
And so with saying that, I mean, in terms of the air technology specifically, those extreme temperatures don't actually play much of a factor on the airframe itself. They're able to work in a very wide range of temperature conditions, from very cold up to very, very hot, without any issues. Certainly moving into Australia has changed the way that we've thought about tent design, generally speaking. So in terms of ventilation and whatnot, and offering additional ventilation in the overall tent design, definitely has, thinking about our Australian customers and those hotter weather conditions. But in terms of the airframe, we found that it's almost a non-factor in terms of those extreme conditions, and that across the board, airframes have performed better than other pole structures in just about every temperature condition.
So to quantify that, if you're talking 7 or 8 PSI of pressure to set the tent up, and you've tested it up to 30 PSI to be your minimum, and there's only 1 or 2 PSI difference in 10 degrees temperature change, then you're still well within the testing parameters there, aren't
definitely.
you?
Yeah, not even close to the failure point. So, yeah. So
it's safe to say you can't overinflate them without a hell of a lot of effort then? Yeah,
well, that's a good question. Some people ask that, if my pressure gauge on my pump is broken, am I going to accidentally inflate it? And the short answer is no. You'd have to be working really, really hard. And another point, all of our tents come with a pump that has both a pressure gauge and a pressure release valve. So it basically eliminates the chance of overinflating it.
We've got one here.
It's funny, the pump you have sitting on the table there, that one in particular, it's not designed to reach those very high pressures. That one in particular just won't be possible to do it.
Okay.
This is the same pump that I have for my SUP, and I reckon getting up to like stand-up paddleboard, getting up to maybe 8 or 9 PSI, it's a good time, but you've got to get to 15 and it's like hell, especially the last 2 or 3 PSI. It's just, you literally feel like you want to die, and you're taking turns and there's like 5 pumps and then the next person pumps it. So it's I can't imagine having to manually pump something up to 30 PSI.
So this one I don't think has the pressure release valve though, but the ones that come with a 10 have got the pressure gauge here and then a little kind of thing on the side that you just pump until you can hear it hissing out the side of the pump really, and that's when you know your tent's pumped up as tight as it needs to be, basically.
Guarantees that you get to the right pressure and you're not going to risk overinflating it.
Yeah.
But,
what about the electric pumps? Do they have a PSI setting where it will shut off on its own?
Yeah, so we sell an electric pump. It's called the Supercell pump. You can plug it into your car and it'll do the work for you, which is awesome. And the Supercell, it comes with an automatic pressure turnoff valve. So once it reaches the right pressure, it'll just shut off. So again, you're not going to risk overinflating the frame. But a lot of guys, especially tradies who use a air compressor, for example, every day, they want to know, can I use my air compressor to inflate our tent? And we don't recommend it. We also just don't sell the right fittings to even be able to connect it. But we wouldn't recommend it. We recommend using something that's designed specifically for a tent. And often they are similar pumps that are designed for things like stand-up paddleboards and whatnot. And they're just the right tool for the job.
Yeah, we do. That's what I was going to say. That's one of the common questions we get as well from people who are like, oh, I've got an air compressor. Is there a Boston valve adapter or what have you? But I guess there's a lot more margin for error using a pump that's not purpose built. So
you don't want to forget a pump that can go up to 40, 50, 60 PSI.
Even on the other side of things, smaller electric pumps that are designed for airbeds and beach balls and stuff, they just aren't designed to be able to reach the kinds of pressures that you need to be able to inflate an air tent. So
yeah, good point.
You kind of have the whole spectrum, things that are designed for very high pressures, like an air compressor we don't recommend. But also on the other side, an airbed pump, it just won't have the pressure and the power to be able to inflate your tent. So yeah, specifically something designed for an air tent is what we'd recommend.
It's a different sort of workout for someone. Instead of a shoulder and forearm workout with a hammer, it's a whole sort of upper body workout where you're just sitting at the campsite.
You know what? If you get your you get your form right, you could be doing deadlifts almost.
It could be, yeah. You can incorporate your workout into your camping
totally.
trip.
So in terms of people think inflatable tent, that everybody's probably been in a situation where they're camping where they've had a tent pole fail, whether it's feral wind or they're just setting up and it's just snapped out of the blue. Are you going to wake up in the morning with 20 kilos of tent on top of you if something does fail?
Well, you shouldn't. We have very, very low failure ratings, to be fair. And it does depend on the style of tent, about how that looks. So a lot of our tents are a tunnel design, so there's independent air tubes. So if a single air tube were to fail, the rest of your tent will remain standing, not a problem. Others have totally interconnected air poles, so a failure would be a little bit different, but those are very rare. But just to give customers peace of mind, we do have replacement poles available. So if you're, for example, going to a trip in a very remote location, for example, you could bring a spare airframe just as you would like a spare pole or a pole repair kit kind of thing. And they're very simple to replace, and they're user replaceable and simple to change out if you were to have a failure.
Yeah, and obviously,
some guys, going out into the outback will want that.
I do want to highlight, we've sort of brought up failures a fair amount, and it's not because we think that they're a genuine issue. It's more just because that seems to be the primary hurdle that consumers have when they're looking at an air tent, is that they have these sort of questions, like in their mind, if a pole breaks, you just whip out your gaffer tape or you just put another pole in. But it's like, if you have an air tent, is the whole structure going to fail when there's a puncture? But I think, do some of your tents have, and I don't know if I've got this right, but are even in like a huge big, I don't know what the word is, but one huge big curve of an air tent, would there be multiple or like 2 or 3 bladders in there, or is it just one big singular long bladder? Is that making sense?
Like you mean in one hoop you're talking about?
In one sort of what you would call a traditional ground to ground hoop. Is there literally just one tube, or is there more than one tube?
So it does depend on the design. So each of our kind of series will follow a kind of similar pattern. So, for example, our Evo and Pro Series tents are generally a tunnel-shaped design. So I'll have several parallel air beams, and those are each independent from each other. Whereas like our Pronto series, for example, is more of a dome shape, and all of those beams are actually welded together at the top, at the apex of the tent. Whereas we also have some other cabin designs that link in other ways, kind of thing. But generally speaking, each beam will have its own independent inner tube inside of it.
Okay, cool. So sorry, you go. I feel like I've talked a lot, but it is my birthday.
Over. Yeah, all right, you go then.
No, you go.
Well, I was going to slightly change the topic, so on the wind and rain, but if you got a...
Yeah, only just to sort of how you talk about having a couple of inner tubes on you like you would tent poles if you're going out on a big trip. How easy are they to replace?
Yeah, so basically that inner tube is housed inside of an outer casing, and that's mounted inside of the tent. And there again, it's a little bit hard to speak in general terms because each tent is a little bit different in how that connects. Mm-hmm. But it's usually about a 15-minute job to change out an airframe, and really simple. So it's very intuitive design. Probably a good comparison would be like changing a bike inner tube type of thing. It would probably be a similar kind of time frame and level of difficulty, I suppose.
You don't need any special, tools or
no special tools. It's all really simple and intuitive. The only thing you'll need is a pair of scissors to cut the zip tie that holds the outer casing zipper together.
The danger zipper.
It's the only time you want to open it. You're replacing the inner tube, of course.
Yeah. Okay, that's cool. Yeah, I'm good now.
No, all right, good. I want to ask about wind and rain. Now, rain, I think, is really well. We probably covered that in one of our previous chats with you about waterhead ratings. And the protection with rain comes down to the tent design and the fabrics used. But in terms of wind performance, I've always perceived air tents to be they probably perform the same as other frames, but in terms of their ability to sort of bounce back from bad wind, they're better because you can literally flatten an air tent and it just pops back up, right? If you did that with a steel frame, it would stay flat. It doesn't bounce back up. So I know the ones I've set up, you just walk up to the corner, you can push that frame sort of right into the tent and then it just bounces back again. So in terms
of
wind,
easily though.
No, it's stiff. Like, it doesn't easily fall down. It's a stiff frame, but if you literally lie on the tent, you can eventually get it to sort of fold in and then it just pops back up again because it's an airframe. So I also like the guy ropes and things a lot of you guys use on a lot of your tents are webbing, like actual really durable webbing guy ropes. And your designs too are this kind of space age kind of dome. They look a bit like a spaceship, a lot of them, I reckon.
Yeah, that sort of tunnel. I reckon they sort of look a bit like an armadillo.
Good one. Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
They're cool.
So I was going to ask you the question that I think I pretty much answered, but what's your take on their performance in wind?
Yeah, well, you make a good point. A lot of the wind performance is down to the shape and the design of the tent. So whether it's aerodynamic or whatnot, or if you set up the broad side of the tent into the wind, that's generally not a good idea. But in terms of the airframes themselves, one thing I always like to think about it, and if you go into a store and you look at an airframe, they can be about 10 to 15 centimeters in diameter, and you hold up an 8 millimeter fiberglass or aluminum pole kind of thing. It becomes really apparent which one's going to offer structure, especially for a really large family camping tent. Mm-hmm. So those really large diameter poles, if they're inflated to the right pressures, offer excellent structure. So we do find that the airframes are generally stiffer and perform really well in the wind, especially when talking about those large family camping tents. But as you said, if you do get to the point where you're really stressing the frames, the air tents have the additional advantage of having additional flexibility. So if you're going to really strain and stress a fiberglass or even a steel tent frame, it's going to bend or snap in half or something like that, whereas an airframe has that additional flexibility to be able to move with the wind and snap back into place. We've even heard of these horrible examples of someone who accidentally ran over their tent with their ute and tore the fly, but the frame was intact and it stood back up.
That's actually pretty crazy.
That's an extreme example, but there's no way that would have happened.
Steel frame?
No, not at all.
A rigid pole.
And it is a really big consideration, I think, for Australian campers, especially coastal campers, because what I know in South Australia, where I usually would coastal camp, it can be the most perfectly beautiful day, still glassy water, and then come 3 or 4 o'clock, all of a sudden you've got like 50k onshore winds and nobody's shelter is left on the beach. Yep. And, you know, that's probably one of the biggest factors of stress, I think, for people when they're looking for camping tents, especially if they coastal camp. And I think one of the largest inquiries that we get is how well will this stand up to 40, 50 plus K winds and things. And I'm always like, just get an air tent.
I think there's a big factor in that with setup as well, because quite often a tent will wind will affect the tent during that setup phase when you haven't got it pegged down, you haven't got all the guy ropes in place. So you've got a metal frame tent kind of half up and the wind picks it up and blows it across the campsite and it gets damaged. Gazebos are a classic for that, right? With an air tent, you literally, and I was going to ask about ease of setup, which was sort of covered off on, but you literally do just peg the base out and then start pumping it up. So the wind could be blowing a gale and you're just pumping that frame up and it's just kind of going to flap around and then you make it sturdy with all the guy ropes. So setup's easier than a standard tent in the wind, I would think. I've not actually done it, but logic tells me it would be easier.
I would have thought so too, because the fly's attached. So you don't have to worry about putting on your fly sheet and then pegging that out separately and all that sort of jazz too.
And that's a good point. And we're answering all your questions here for you, Ryan. Are you learning anything? But you can leave the fly attached because you haven't got and jump in if I'm saying anything wrong here, Ryan, but you haven't got a frame that folds in, so you can't damage the fly sheet with the frame. So you can leave everything attached. You just deflate it, roll the whole thing up and put it back in the bag. There's no multi-layers to it. Have you got anything else to add to what we've taught you there?
Exactly right. And I think a major point is that everyone focuses on the ease of setup, and we'll talk more about that, because that's a huge draw for the air tents, is that they are a lot simpler to set up, and our designs are kind of an all one piece construction. They just all go together, like you said. There's no fiddling around with the fly sheet afterwards. But another huge advantage is the speed and ease of packing it away. At the end of a camping trip, it can be a difficult job. And even in extreme weather, if you decide, hey, you know, we're going to get poured on or something like that, and we want to pack up camp quickly, you can do it so much quicker and easier with an air tent compared to a fiberglass pole tent, for example.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. And I think people underestimate how important the ease and the speed of packing away is, in addition to the advantages of speed of setup. So your tent is protected from the rain. If you're packing away in the rain, it all goes down in one piece, and it's super simple.
It's really satisfying undoing that valve when it's to let it down, because it's just massive of air and the tent just goes. I'm
imagining there's been a couple of times where the weather has gotten so bad and we've just decided, in my tent camping days anyway, we need to just pack up and get the hell out of Dodge, sort of thing. Yeah. But you've just had to leave the tent there because it's really not possible to just get the tent down and do all the frame and whatever. Whereas I'm imagining with an air tent, you could literally just open the boot of your car,
stuff it in,
let all the air out and just shove it in and get in and drive. Like, you don't even have to worry too much. Sort that out. You don't have to worry about poles and all that sort of jazz.
Well, I think the bags, I haven't packed one up for a while, but the bags you guys use are generally oversized as well. So it's not like a wrestle to get it back in the bag, and you haven't got those rigid poles where you've got, sort of fixed parameters. You got a
120 centimetre bag and 119 centimetre frame.
That's right. You fold it up exactly right and it fits perfectly. But you guys, I think they're still the same, where you've got a bit of space in there to be able to actually get the tent back in the bag, not wrestle it back in.
Talking about the ease of setup and pack away too, I guess these would have a lot of appeal, especially like your smaller Pronto 5s and things like that, to people with either solo campers or people with mobility issues even as well, just to get out camping.
Absolutely. So, I mean, an air tent of any size, they're so simple to set up even with a single person. And that can be a really tough job with some other pole structures, especially with a really large tent. And for some people, like you said, with mobility problems, older campers, that kind of thing, it can even, turn them off of tent camping completely, just because setting up the tent is either too difficult or sometimes impossible. Whereas, if you were to pair an air tent with one of our electric pumps, almost anybody could set up this tent. The pump's doing the work for you. At the very end, you might just need to help lift it up, but a single person can set up even a very large family camping tent, no matter who they are. Which is a really great advantage.
Throw some drillable pegs into the scenario and you've got a really easy setup.
Yeah, definitely. Yep. Admittedly, when you're talking about your larger family tents, when I was looking at your catalogue a little while ago, you guys have some like huge, big canvas cabin, multi-room tent things, and I just drool over those. And I was part of me is like, I wish that I did practical tent camping now because I would buy one of these because they're so beautiful. But anyway, so the last sort of, I guess we've covered quite a lot in the air tents, but the last point we've got here to chat about is materials and things like that. So generally you make yours out of synthetic materials. Is that correct?
We do both. So we do have a range of canvas tents, but the majority of our range are polyester camping tents. That's right.
Mm-hmm. And what sort of the motivation, I guess, for choosing those polyester?
Very synthetic.
Yeah. Those synthetic fabrics over, say, the canvas.
Yeah, so I mean, there's advantages and disadvantages to everything, and I suppose that's probably even a good video on its own. The differences between canvas and polyester, but generally speaking, polyester offers a really good balance of weight and value and performance kind of thing. Polyester won't last as long as a heavy duty canvas tent in terms of UV performance. But like for like, there end up being a lot lighter weight of a tent, more affordable. So in our kind of tent design, our polyester tents, we're able to kind of offer more for the customer in terms of features and whatnot. At the right price and whatnot with a polyester tent than some of our canvas tent designs, which usually follow more of a traditional or like a timeless classic design approach. But whereas a polyester tent, because they're lighter weight, more affordable, we can offer kind of the latest and greatest technologies and whatnot at the right price. And that's where we've found the majority of the demand for our products has been is kind of that upper mid-range tent design that just offers really modern and innovative technology kind of thing.
The canvas gets pretty bulky too, doesn't it? I know I've seen a few of your canvas ones and I'm sure they're tough, but you wouldn't want to be putting them up and taking them down too often. It's probably that long-term stay kind of solution like you talked about before, what they use in the UK.
So it all comes down to what it is you're looking for. If you're looking for something for weekend camping, you don't want a really heavy, bulky tent. You want something that's quick and easy to set up. So we kind of cover the full spectrum with our tent range.
Yeah, nice.
What is your favorite tent in your range, you personally?
What do you use to shelter your family when you're camping?
I'm a bit spoiled. I can kind of test a whole lot of different tents.
You've got
so I'm
30 tents in your garage.
Pretty lucky in that way. But I'm a big fan of kind of our mid-range tent, the Evo range. I think it just offers a really good balance of not being overly heavy or bulky to pack in the car. Because I've got a lot of kids and we have a lot of stuff, so that's a huge consideration for us. But still offering really good comfort and features and whatnot. So for me and my family, that the Evo TXL is pretty much the number one pick.
There you go. For a family of how many kids? How many kids you got?
1 million.
Yeah, 6 kids.
There you go. So that's the Zempire's choice for a family of 6 kids. What was it? Evo TXL. Yeah, that's Zempire's choice.
Brilliant.
For a quick summer getaway, the Pronto 10 is another really good option for us.
Yeah, is that the 2-room one?
Yeah, two rooms.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, they're awesome.
Well,
I've learned heaps. I hope that answers all our questions and builds. We want to build confidence in the air tent range.
Yeah, definitely.
Because we certainly have it, but we can understand the misconception around it. So,
for me personally, I did always think they were a bit of a gimmick until I saw one up in the store and I was like, hang on a minute, this is cool. Actually really cool.
Yeah. And they are. When you feel those big, the thick poles and how firm they are and how rigid it actually is, you think, okay, I can see how this actually works. Yeah.
For sure. Cool. Is there anything else you'd like to add today, Ryan? Because I'm pretty sure we're about done now.
We've covered off on a lot.
Maybe as a parting point, we as Zempire, we didn't start as an air tent company. We started kind of before that technology was even we were aware of that in New Zealand. But we've almost completely moved to making exclusively air tents. And that's been a conscious decision just because we think it's the best option and offers the most advantages to our customers. So, hopefully that can be something at least customers can think about,
Totally.
Is that we're moving almost exclusively to that technology because we think it's the best, and that's the way forward. So
yeah, there's a reason for that, for sure.
A snowy store and see them on display and see for yourself and see them in the campground as well.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Check them out.
Thanks, Ryan, so much for joining us.
Thank you, guys.
Appreciate it.
Cool. We'll catch you next time.
Awesome.
Well,
another episode. That was awesome.
That was awesome.
Yeah.
Always love talking to Ryan.
Yeah.
It's
good fun.
Thanks for joining us, guys. I hope you got as much out of this episode as we did. Don't forget to subscribe, as I mentioned earlier, and also jump onto the Snowies Camping Show on Facebook. If you've got any questions for us or any questions for Ryan, I know he's sometimes in there and more than happy to answer them. Anyway, thanks again. We will see you next week.
See you later.